Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you all for having me. As was previously stated, I'm Candice Mays, Project Director of Mapping Black California. Today I hope to take you on a learning journey along with myself. Similar to our first presentation from Zed, there's a timeline here, and our timeline is before and after, because who I am as a professional before and after starting my work with Mapping Black California has changed considerably, and who we are as an organization before and after 2020 also changed us considerably. Mapping Black California designs data visualizations to develop narrative storytelling tools addressing systemic inequities at regional and local levels. We were founded, and statewide as well. We were founded in 2015 as a project of Black Voice News, which is a Black legacy newspaper located in the Inland Empire of Southern California, with a very simple goal to modernize the newspaper's reporting with the integration of data research and visualizations. I came on board in 2019 after moving back home upon receiving an MFA in creative writing fiction. I intentionally moved back home. I moved back in with my mother so that I could work part-time and finish my book. So when I had a conversation about joining Mapping Black California, this was the deal. If you see me later on today, feel free to ask me how many hours I work now. Don't ask me how the book is coming, okay? My family's very, very confused. They're like, weren't you writing? You're still writing that? It's still? And I just say it's going. So I quickly learned at Mapping Black California that our work was about more than making maps. Initially, it sounded cool, and I was like, okay, let's make some maps. That's neat. But it also became very clear that there was a bigger role with Mapping Black California, not just in newsrooms, but in the state. Because there are many times where we receive requests from our newsroom for data and we could not access that data. Sometimes it was because the data didn't exist. And there are other times because the data was often not disaggregated by race, and therefore we couldn't glean important information about how various issues were impacting our communities. So the goal became bigger, to make data on racial justice and equity more accessible. And the problem became very clear. Sorry, the teacher in me wants to turn around. And so I quickly began to learn that data has a race problem. Publicly available data often fails to capture the realities of Black communities, either through the lack of detailed disaggregated data information or the outright experience of Black communities. Now, what I'm going to do is walk you through a series of lessons we learned in 2020 through 3 concurrent events that directly impacted Mapping Black California and our ability to do the work of informing our communities about the issues impacting them. The first was the 2020 census. We were hired by the official California Complete Count Office to be the African American statewide strategic media lead. And we were tasked with the job of informing Black communities across the state of California with accurate information about why it was important to be counted in the 2020 census. Now, for a variety of very legitimate reasons, Black people are suspicious of the government and especially suspicious of participating in the census. And it didn't help that in 2020, there were active campaigns against participation in the census altogether. Now, we faced a problem because while the Complete Count Office had a map of hard-to-count communities, that map was not disaggregated by race. And so there were certain areas across the state that were identified as high target, hard to count communities that we should target. However, those communities did not have large concentrations of Black people. For example, San Jose was one of those communities identified by that map, and their Black population is very low. So had we followed that map, we would have completely misallocated resources and funds. So what we did was we created our own map of Black hard to count populations, and we were able to leverage this information with a statewide strategic ethnic media partnerships to distribute the assets that we produced to over 100 outlets across the state. The result, the Californian Black participation rate outperformed the national average. California's Black population count was more accurate than the national count, while the nation's undercount of Black populations increased from 2.1% in 2010 to 3.3% in 2020. California's Black undercount was only by 1%, even though 30% live in hard-to-count areas identified by our map. The second issue we came across was during COVID-19, when we noticed that early reporting from mainstream media outlets also did not disaggregate data by race, and therefore we did not have a clear picture on how the pandemic was impacting Black communities. There were a lot of rumors flying around about COVID-19 and Black people, ridiculous rumors, such as Black people couldn't get COVID-19, or that because large percentages of Black people are O positive, we also could not die from COVID-19. But we were hearing different stories in our communities on the ground. And so we decided to make our own dashboard in order to assess how Black workers were being impacted by COVID-19. And what we found was not surprising. Because Black people were more likely to be considered essential workers, they were more likely to be on the front lines and more likely to contract COVID-19. That compounded with the fact that public health outcomes for Black communities are dismal, made those essential workers at high risk for being severely impacted by COVID-19, for having severe infection rates. We also learned from our work in the 2020 census that Black people are more likely to live in multi-generational housing, thus meaning they're going to work, contracting COVID-19, already at a high risk because of their public health outcomes, and then bringing this illness home to their elderly family members. So we actually had a unique opportunity that I will tell you about a little bit later. But the impact of this was that we were academically peer reviewed by the Digital Humanities Review, and we were also able to pass an Assembly Bill number 1604, Chapter 313, which mandates that all worker data in the state of California be disaggregated by race. California is the first and the only state in the country to have this mandate. The third thing I want to talk about is the murder of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. This is something that we were battling as well and dealing with, both on a professional level and a personal level. The thing about these events is you don't get to go home from them. And so what happens when these sort of social justice atrocities take place? There are a lot of performative actions and empty promises made by elected officials. I have a photo here of Nancy Pelosi, our homegirl, kneeling in a kente stool in the nation's capital. Thanks. Our Black community saw this as a performative act, especially given the controversial history of kneeling in this country. Additionally, they did things we didn't ask for, like make Juneteenth a federal holiday. We were celebrating that just fine on our own. Thanks again. However, there was something that was happening in the country that showed us that there was an opportunity for actionable change to actually happen. And that was the trend across the nation of various counties, municipalities, cities, jurisdictions, however you want to categorize them, declaring racism as a public health crisis. We saw this as an opportunity to really systemically break down, or strategically, break down a lot of the systemic inequities we were seeing in our communities. But we were also aware that without accountability, once the protests died down and the public moved on, many of these promises would fall to the wayside. And so we wanted to figure out how we could create a tool that would not only be a resource to journalists to produce stories around the declarations, but also an accountability tool to let elected officials know that even if they moved on, we still hadn't. And so we developed the Combating Racism as a Public Health Crisis content aggregator and accountability tool. We developed this tool in partnership with Esri. I just put in my iPad code wrong. We developed this tool in partnership with Esri because we wanted to make sure that this customized platform would be easy to navigate for our audience, who is the general public. Oftentimes when you work in data sciences and in map making, your audience are your peers. And so a lot of times data scientists don't think about making information easily digestible because they can speak to one another in jargon. And so we made sure to prioritize that the map would be the navigation piece to this. We knew user instincts, if you see a map, you're gonna wanna click on where you're from. So when you visit the Combating Racism platform and you click on where you're from, I believe in this example it's Riverside, the entire page filters to the region that you have clicked on. And with that, you will be able to see the declarations, the scorecard we developed assessing the thoroughness of those declarations, alongside the Web3 blockchain authenticated screen captures of those declarations, meeting agendas, tweets, or anything else pertaining to those declarations of racism as a public health crisis. And we were able to do that in partnership with the Starling Lab Center for Data and Integrity. The use of web recording technology to capture and authenticate these declarations via blockchain ensures information cannot be tampered with. It acts as a valuable tool for journalists to verify documents, and it allows public access to authenticated resolutions. Ultimately, we pioneered new civil rights accountability methods via Web3 authentication and blockchain protocols. And our call to action to utilize these tools for accountability and progress resulted in a 4-part reporting series and also the passage of an additional declaration of racism as a public health crisis in Sonoma County. Our beloved founder, who was here yesterday, and I know many of you know, said it best. We frequently encounter data gaps that perpetuate harm in our communities. We need a solution that is structured within a community mapping framework, encouraging community collaboration around data and information by bringing together community media, community-based organizations, and philanthropic institutions. That solution is Mapping Black California. So, through those lessons we learned in 2020 and the understanding that our mission was greater than just building maps, we refined our mission. And we now know that our mission is to equip the state's population with data-driven knowledge in all things Black and data while working to eliminate statewide, regional, and local systemic inequities. We do this through a 4-pronged approach. We obviously have to research data. We have to make sure it's disaggregated by race so that we know what's happening in our communities. We then visualize that data so that we know that it is easily digestible, retainable, and transferable. And then we amplify those visualizations via our network of media partners, community-based organizations, and varying government organizations that we work with. And honestly, in my opinion, the lesson I've learned is that the most important part of Mapping Black California and my role as a project director is to also be a data advocate. In that 4th photo, you'll see, I'll read it left to right, our executive editor, Stephanie Williams, our founder, Dr. Paulette Brown-Hines, and myself, Skip, with the California State Attorney General, Rob Bonta. It was during a private audience with the State Attorney General while I was presenting on the COVID-19 maps that I flippantly mentioned, by the way, this dashboard had to be depreciated because the state stopped reporting disaggregated worker data by race. 2 years later, the initiative passed, and we weren't quite sure if we had really influenced that because no one called us back and was like, so what did you say happened? So, I was like, I think we did it. And Paulette was like, I don't know, we shouldn't talk about it. But I received confirmation at the Inland Empire Community Foundation Policy Summit just this past summer from someone in the Attorney General's office that we were indeed the catalyst for passing that policy initiative. And from that, I learned a really important lesson, that sometimes data activism and advocacy is about giving people the business and taking it to the streets and really making sure your voice is heard. And other times, it's as simple as communicating a need to the right person. Because I remember when I communicated that need to the Attorney General, his eyes got really big. And it wasn't a big, oh my God. It was big as in he had no idea that this was an issue that needed addressing. And by just simply communicating it, he took it from there. But he wouldn't have been able to do that had not someone brought it to his attention. So to wrap up, we are sustainable and nimble with a diversified revenue stream. While we actively partner with grants for reporting with our newspaper, we have our own revenue streams independent of the newspaper. So if the newspaper has any research or visualization requests that are not attached to funding, we are still able to fulfill all of those commitments. Secondly, we are the only community newsroom with a dedicated data journalism unit in the country. And most recently, we were the Next Challenge 2024 Trust and News inaugural winner. We are always, always learning. We are mapping Black California.